It's your boy Reggie. What's up? What's up? It's your boy Reggie, and I'm back at it again with another live stream reaction. Yes, I'm back at it again. Please subscribe to my channel. Yeah, we finna react to um Dan Schneider and that weird stuff that's going on in Nickelodeon. So we're gonna expose his lifestyle and where he came up. I just wanna know where the nigga came from, where the nigga grew up at. So let's react to it.
in like the front line spot, almost like with Dan Schneider and like the hands-on stuff he does.
I have a new video for you because
Okay, Jason Norm. What kind of hands-on stuff does Dan Schneider does? I just want to know, Jason Norm.
we talk a ton about Dan Schneider on my channel. But one thing we haven't talked about is his past and how this man became the creepy Nickelodeon producer that we know today. So we're going to take a deep dive into his past and try to figure out how this man became a monster. So let's talk about it. As you guys probably know by now, Dan Schneider is a creepy man who used to work at Nickelodeon on some of your favorite childhood TV shows. But nowadays, he is known as a monster, and we're going to walk through how he grew up, how he became famous, and how he got the power in Hollywood to take advantage of all of these people. In this video, we're going to go through a timeline of his life, including where he grew up, what he has worked on in Hollywood, and we're even going to hear some of the stories from some survivors who have encountered Dan before. There is a ton to get into, so let's start off at where it all began. Dan Schneider was born January 14th in 1966 in Memphis, Tennessee. His parents are named Harry and Carol Schneider, and he is actually the youngest of 4 children. He's got 3 older sisters, but honestly, I tried to do some research to figure out who they were or to find a picture, and there is nothing online. I don't know if this is done on purpose, but I find it very fishy that there is nothing about his childhood on the internet. But I do actually know that Dan Schneider was voted senior class president at his high school, White Station High School, where I guess he was liked. I mean, if you're senior class president, I guess you're likable. And I guess Dan was smart too, because after graduating high school, he went off to Harvard. This is actually where his father went to school, but Dan did not last long. He was only there for about 2 months before he dropped out. Dan has actually addressed this online because someone asked, why did he drop out of Harvard? And Dan wrote, I grew up as the funny kid in class, and that was pretty consistent throughout my childhood. I was never a great student. The thing I excelled at most in high school was that I would do plays. I moved to a new high school in Memphis my junior year. In my senior year, I won senior class president. Wow. I basically did that by getting on stage and giving a speech that got a lot of laughs. Because of that, I was on stage a lot. I would get on stage in front of people and do little skits and do funny stuff. I realized I really love performing. Which I guess, lucky for Dan, shortly after he dropped.
Why go to Harvard and waste your money? But it's his lifestyle. That's how he wants to do it. I'm here to expose the truth.
Dropped out of school, he had a producer friend who offered him a small role in a film as a pizza boy. After that film, Dan's Hollywood career popped off. His first legit role came in 1984, and it was a short one, but it was in an American teenage comedy called Making the Grade. And this was the first of many films that Dan featured in.
Making the Grade, the comedy that hits higher education below the belt.
In the following year, 1985, Dan actually featured in 2 more movies. One was called Hot Resort, which was whatever, but the other movie was called Better Off DEAD. And in this movie, Dan plays a nerdy character named Ricky, whose mom houses a foreign exchange student from France, and the whole time Dan is treating her like she is his girlfriend. This was prompted by his mother, and his character was extremely childlike in it, playing with toys and such. It's a dark comedy, and I get that Dan Schneider didn't write any of it, but once you get to know who he is,
in this video, y'all, he's playing a young girl creeping, a young boy creeping on a young girl. And I'm like, where were the people on set? Like, y'all enabled Dan Schneider, Nickelodeon, and whoever who did his movies. Y'all enabled it.
it's really odd to look back on that movie because he's playing a creeping on this young little French girl in the movie. But that's one of Dan's most popular roles, and he claims that he stopped on the street for that role more than anything else. Honestly, if I saw him in the street, I would be stopping him for some other reason, but we'll save it for another day. Then in 1986, Dan starred in a show called Head of the Class, where he played Dennis Blunden. This was an extremely successful show, and it ran for 5 seasons. There were actually some funny clips I found online, and it was so weird to see Dan in them because I just see him as such a weird man. To see him as an actor was even weirder.
Janice, I'm gonna give you the money. I just need some more time.
Okay, 5 boxes of cookies. That's $10. If you don't have the money, just give me my cookies back.
I can't.
Those cookies were Girl Scout property.
Ooh, you're in trouble now, man. You're dealing with a very tough organization. Green Berets.
After that movie, he had a few more films come up in 1989, where he was in a film called Happy Together, and it was really hard to watch because there's this one scene where he grabs the girl and kisses her, and when I watched that, I was like, oh gosh, no. Could you imagine being that actress?
Chin joints in the world, you walked into mine. Kiss me.
Oh my God.
Oh, Jesus, that is just so weird. Just seeing Dan as an actor is weird, but him kissing that girl like that is just so weird. I might have to
There's a seat over there. That's
I really wish the internet was around back then and there was like Reddit or something, because I'm sure so many actors and actresses would have stories to tell about Dan. But moving on, in 1993, Dan Schneider then starred in a series called Home Free, and then in the TV Mommies. The following year, in 1994, he actually played Sean Eckert in the film about Tonya and Nancy and that whole scandal that went down with the skating. I can't believe that story is still a thing, but he was involved in the movie. This same year, Dan started making the switch from being the actor to being the writer and the producer on the back end of things. He started writing that same year, 1994, on the show All That, which was a huge success for Nickelodeon. Around the same time, he met his wife, Lisa, which if you have not seen my video about Lisa Lillian, aka Hungry Girl, definitely go watch it right now, but we'll talk about her in a minute. Then 1999 comes around, and the Amanda Show is poppin'. This is like Dan's baby. The Amanda Show.
Okay, I'm going to react to some discussions. We're going to talk about it. We're just going to talk about some discussion things that went on the Amanda Show.
Is his own. He's fully producing it, and Amanda is working alongside him. You guys know that he did some terrible things to Amanda, and we've talked about that in a previous video, but the show was very successful. Moving on to 2001, that's when Dan Schneider started getting in a little bit of trouble. If you guys don't know who Brian Peck is, he is a disgusting monster who worked as the dialogue coach for All That with Dan Schneider. This man got in big trouble for doing some foul things to children on that show, which is really hard to talk about. And when we looked into Brian a little bit deeper, we found out that he was actually involved in this swimming pool situation. So you guys remember the swimming pool camps that Dan Schneider and Brian Peck would host? Well, this was going on back in 2001, 2002, and little kids were gathering at Hollywood homes with pools to hang out with Dan Schneider and Brian Peck with a hope in their heart to be the next biggest thing in Hollywood. The manipulation is insane, and someone actually came out and spoke about their experiences going to one of these camps.
And be like, oh, we'll just take care of the kids. No adults need to come over. Whoa. So he was having pool parties with these kids that were on the shows without any kind of adult supervision going on. What? He was just he's just a sick dude.
Brian was charged in 2002 with what he did, but then shortly after serving jail time, he went to work for another kids network, Disney, on Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, and obviously.
Okay, he got out of jail 16 months to get hired by Disney, y'all. That is just a sad thing, y'all. And the industry is just so twisted and so messed up. For somebody to do jail for what they did to Drake Bell, and then they get out later in 16 after 16 months, it's just heartbreaking.
That's its own other story, and we need to talk about Disney and their problematic people. But let's talk a little bit more about Dan. Because at the same time that Brian was getting in trouble for all of these things he did on all of that, Dan was still working in Hollywood. In 2002, he released What I Like About You, and in the same year, he released Big Fat Liar, which was a huge hit. I remember that movie. It was also a big year for Dan's love life because he got married to his wife, Lisa, who we all know now as Hungry Girl, and she actually is quite problematic. One thing I want to bring up that I didn't bring up in the previous video on her was the fact that she actually was the main person running the whole iCarly in Japan. So you guys may remember this movie called I Go to Japan, and it was a Nickelodeon special that Lisa had a big role in, and iCarly was the main character. She pretty much went to Japan, but in this film, it was really inappropriate and actually very offensive to Japanese people. I can't use the R word, but I would to describe it because what she did with this film was gross and it would not go down nowadays. So that's a quick overview of his wife. And I also don't understand how she could be with Dan Schneider, but it makes me think that she's just as bad as he is. The following year, 2003, is when Dan Schneider created his own company, Schneider's Bakery. It was actually named after his father's business back in Tennessee, but there is a bakery in Ohio with the same name. So not to get confused, the Schneider's Bakery in Ohio is not owned or related to Dan Schneider at all. So you can go and eat there in peace. But Dan Schneider's production company is huge. With nearly 600 episodes produced to date, Dan Schneider and his production team at Schneider's Bakery are the breadwinners behind some of Nickelodeon's favorite TV programs. Since 2003, Dan Schneider and his corrupt crew of the industry's best musicians, writers, producers, etc. have been creating kid TV shows for you guys to enjoy and grow up on. I almost forgot to mention that in 2004, that's when Drake and Josh came out, which is one of the staple shows that I grew up watching and that Dan Schneider is really well known for. There are some feet pictures and references here and there as far as Drake and Josh, but it looks like Drake Bell and Josh have moved on. But if you guys didn't know, Drake Bell is actually Drake Campañana now, which is Spanish for Bell because he became Mexican, he went to Mexico and got a Mexican ID, and now he is speaking Spanish. It's a whole thing. If you haven't seen my video on it, definitely go check it out after this. One of Dan's most memorable shows is Zoey 101, which aired in 2005, and you guys know how that ended. It was extremely messy, and Zoey, aka Jamie Lynn, got pregnant.
So allegedly, Dan Schneider got Jamie Lynn pregnant. Allegedly, we got to keep everything in here for purpose. Dan, do not come and sue me. He got her pregnant. So we looking at the photos and stuff. We like Maddie looks just like her loving father, allegedly, Dan Schneider. There's no way you can cover this up. Well, we have to keep everything allegedly. Allegedly.
A lot of people believe at this point in 2007, 2008 that Dan Schneider got her pregnant. There are tons of pictures online that show that Jamie Lynn's daughter kind of looks like Dan. And as you guys can see in this picture, their eyebrows, their mouths, their faces kind of look alike to me. But I was thinking about doing a full video about this situation because there is so much to unpack here. And I truly believe that Dan Schneider had some weird connection relationships back on Zoey 101. That whole set was extremely toxic. I mean, we heard from Alexa Nichols herself that it was horrible, and I would have hated to be a child actor in that situation. Moving on to 2007, Dan Schneider created iCarly, which was a major hit for Nickelodeon. This show has some of the worst foot references, and I know that the grown adults on set at iCarly knew that this had to be inappropriate. I mean, you guys know how Jeanette McCurdy feels about Dan Schneider, and I definitely believe that he did some awful things to everyone on set. Jeanette McCurdy actually recently made a TikTok where she was referring to some of the news, I believe, around Dan Schneider, because a lot of people are talking about Dan Schneider again, things are resurfacing, and she is feeling a little bit triggered by it all. I mean, can you blame her? Because this man used to obsess about her feet, post pictures about her toes on the internet, ask fans to identify her feet, and then confirms it on the internet. It's just all way too weird for me, and there's a reason why Jeanette does not like Dan. But it does seem like Miranda actually likes Dan. He actually commented on this picture of Miranda where she put a foot on her head for whatever reason, and he wrote, "Oh my gosh, I thought I loved the bow, but I like your foot even more." What an odd thing to say about this picture. Like, why would he like the feet and the hair? But he's just obsessed with feet. But that didn't scare Miranda from coming back for an iCarly revival, which I believe is supposed to come out this year, 2021. But in 2007, the same year that Dan is working on iCarly and Zoe 101, there was an incident that went down. We talked about this on my channel in the past, but you guys know that there is a woman who came out and spoke about her experiences with Dan. She shared that she was part of a casting call that got extremely inappropriate and barefoot, and it was really odd. This actually forced the actress out of acting, and she didn't want to be part of the industry anymore.
We would go on auditions just to different places, and eventually I got a manager and an agent. And my agent contacted me and my family about possibly getting a good Nickelodeon gig. I personally, at the time, I watched a ton of Nickelodeon, and I was very immersed in that lifestyle, so I wanted to pursue it. Audition call listing, they did mention, like, you know, wear something cute, like wear spaghetti straps or a skirt or, you know, whatever. And my mom, when she told me later on that whenever she saw things like that, she thought that it was a little uncomfortable for people to be telling kids what to wear.
How old were you at the time?
15, 14 years old. Once about 40 kids were selected, we were then told to take off our shoes and that we were each going to go into a room to show the producer, who is Dan Schneider, the tapes to see who we would want on the show. And of course, you know, we always ask, like, oh, what do we have to do? Like, what would you like us to be doing once we're in there? And my agent told me, you know, he's like, it's going to be like he's like, you got to just take off your shoes, just like run around.
This is what the equivalent to everybody talks about his Nickelodeon no-shoe audition parties. Like, why do you want these kids to run around with their feet? You sick little bastard. You're just sick, Dan.
Around in front of the camera, you know, talk about how much you love being barefoot. And at the time, even, you know, it was like, okay, that's weird, but I didn't think anything of it because I was still young.
Right.
And then when I saw other kids doing it, like their parents were like, take your shoes off, like we're going in, like this is it, this is your thing. You know, it was all the kids that were wearing like the shorts, like the, you know, spaghetti strap tank tops, you know, things that were a little more open and less reserved.
Okay, so taking it back to 2010, that's when Victorious came out. And honestly, I can't talk too much about Victorious because you guys know I got in trouble recently. But anyways, Dan was very active on Twitter. He shared this foul tweet where he wrote, "Little Ariana Grande from Victorious smiles at one of her co-stars' feet. But whose foot is it?" Like, ugh, God. Like, little Ariana Grande stares at feet. Why is that so exciting for him? And then there's another tweet that he tweeted out in this same year, 2010. "Toes, similar to fingers, but not nearly as good. Who agrees?" I'm sorry, Dan, but I disagree. But as we all know, Dan is known for his creepy tweets, like this one. Fact, a typical person blindfolded can guess another person's gender simply by smelling their breath. This person quote retweeted and wrote, "Why is Dan Schneider breathing on blindfolded people?" Good question. And there are so many other foul tweets from Dan Schneider out there, but a lot.
My thing is that Nickelodeon was aware that he was making tweets like that, but Nickelodeon still let it go on. Like that's the thing. Hello, Nickelodeon enablers.
A lot of them have been deleted because he thought that, removing them from the internet would make us all forget about the gross things he has done. But obviously, it's not that simple. Before we get to Sam and Kat, we have to talk about all the things that went down in 2012 because there is so much to unpack here. While Dan was working with a bunch of children on set, there were people in the industry who were getting in trouble for what they were doing. In 2012, Martin West, a talent agent for Nickelodeon and Disney, got in really big trouble for doing some things with a 14-year-old, and obviously that's not allowed. So he got in big trouble there. So they were investigating, but I don't know why they didn't look into Dan Schneider. I mean, they were even going for the production assistants. This one man named Jason Michael Hurdy actually got in pretty big trouble after bringing young girls on set at Nickelodeon. And then once they were there on set in his possession, he did whatever he wanted to with them. So these gross men were getting in trouble in 2012, but I guess Dan Schneider was just overlooked because he is so powerful. Something that I want to mention, and it actually bothers me, is that in my videos about Dan Schneider, we have focused on a lot of the big stars, a lot of the big celebrities and what they've gone through. But a lot of the times, the big celebrities aren't the ones who were actually really hurt by this man. It's the ones you don't know their names. It's the smaller stars who had these small interactions with him that changed their lives. There is one person who reached out to me with her story about Dan, and I actually pre-recorded this part, so I'm going to go ahead and play it for you guys, and I want you to hear how manipulative Dan was in this situation. And even though it's not the craziest story, it's pretty crazy, and it reminds me that this little girl could be one in hundreds of thousands that he has gotten to. So at this time, she was only 9 years old, walking through Hollywood, and her mother was pointing out things to her as she approaches the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And then there's this man walking closely behind them. We weren't really bothered by it because it's Hollywood and there's a lot of people there. So we continue walking, and he eventually says something to me along the lines of, "Hey, I like those shoes. I wish they made them in my size." They were bright yellow Reebok shoes, and I just turned around and said, "Thank you. My mother bought them for me." He then says hello to my mother, and she says hello back. Nothing was said after that, and me and my mother walked into a nearby 7-Eleven, and he follows behind us. He definitely seemed distant when he spoke, but open, if that makes sense. He taps my mother's shoulder while I'm at the Slurpee station making a drink. They begin talking, and he pulls his wallet out and shows something to my mother. I say assume because I was away from my mother, and she refuses to talk to me about it. So I only know what I've seen at that moment. But I hear her voice raise in excitement as she talks to him. He hands her a business card, and then the conversation ends. Later on, my mother and I were back in the car. She says tomorrow we're going to Nickelodeon Studios. I asked her why, and she said I might be able to get a role on one of their shows as a supporting character. I get excited because I love Nick, so I was wailing. So the next day comes around, and my mother is driving to an address that Dan had given her over a previous phone call. We approached the studio on Sunset, where Dan and one of his other colleagues were standing outside. Me and my mother park, and they lead us on a tour through the studio. There were lots of empty seats. I believe it was because it was a weekend. He asked me what my favorite show was, which was iCarly, like every other kid at the time. This next part is where the first red flag came in about the situation. He took us to the set where they filmed iCarly. He took us to the iCarly bedroom. He said I could look around while he stood and talked to his colleague, who left after their conversation was ended. While he was talking to his colleague, my mother was taking pictures of me around the room. When his colleague left, Dan noticed the pictures she was taking and became enraged. He began going on about how he was giving me a life-changing opportunity and that we were taking advantage. He threatened to sue us and ruin my life as a child actor if the photos were not deleted. So my mother deleted them. She felt very visibly uneasy, and then Dan tried to comfort her and apologize for his inappropriate actions. We continued to walk through the studio, and he takes us over to a dressing room. Very excited, he grabs a piece of paper and asked me to spell my name. I spelled it, and he took the paper and tagged it on the door, saying, "One day this could be your." And then I obviously got really excited. So we enter the room and we begin talking, and he says that he would want me to become the half-sister of Charlotte on Henry Danger, whose role on the show would depend on how fans responded to her. He said that I would have a small part in the pilot special and that we would talk about it in later episodes. I've never personally watched the show because of this situation, so I don't know if that idea was eventually scrapped, but he began conducting an interview type of conversation. Then he asked me to recite lines in different emotions. So one of the ones I remember was to say, "Oh my God, why would you say that?" And he asked me to say it dramatically and sad or depressed, then happy and giggly. After we finished reciting, he asked my mom to step out of the room to see how I would act without her. So she stepped out and he asked me to recite the lines, which I did. He then started acting strangely when he heard my mother answer a phone call. He asked me to put on the high heels and then walk around. Remember, she's only 9 years old at this time. The heels he handed me were a size 2.
There he go with the shoes. Hello, Nickelodeon. There he goes again with the shoes and with the feet and stuff. What the hell?
Big, and then he asked me to step into another room and put a dress on over my clothing. And then I began to feel strangely. So I took the heels off and I slipped my shoes back on. I asked if I can go to the restroom, and he asked if I remembered where it was. I said yes, and I left the room. I pulled the door closed, and I ran to my mother. I whispered to her what was going on, and we ran out of that studio and never spoke of it again. About 10 minutes later, he began to call her, and she blocked him. We never talked to him or spoke about it after that one conversation in the car. He is a bad man and should be in prison. So obviously that was a lot. And if you guys ever have any story you want to share with me, you can reach out to me on Instagram at SL04N or my email at sloanwellknown@gmail.com. Obviously that's alleged and I wasn't there, but I definitely believe that it went down and that Dan Schneider put her in a really uncomfortable situation. It reminds me of the previous stories we talked about on my channel, and that these little girls are put in these situations and honestly scared out of the industry because of it. But let's continue, because in 2013, that's when Sam and Cat came out. And this is a TV show with Jeanette McCurdy and Ariana Grande. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Ariana Grande. This show also had a lot of inappropriate references, but one thing that we can never forget is this tweet sent out on September 13th, 2013, where I'm sure Dan instructed someone to post this tweet encouraging young kids to take a picture of their feet and then post it on Twitter. So many kids ended up actually doing it, and it's so gross to look online and see all of this because it's obviously just there for Dan to look at and to enjoy for his own pleasure and his fantasies. The same year, he also replied to this person who wrote his name in the sand, and then he replied and said, "That's awesome, thanks. I hope you don't have too much sand between your toes now." Like, oh God, can you imagine if that was my daughter like tweeting that out? I would see that tweet from the producer and then like remove her phone permanently. This behavior isn't okay, and Dan Schneider should not be using his power and his platform to solicit photos of children's feet because that's what he enjoys. You guys need to recognize how wrong that is and to use your like public platform to
Okay, so that's what the predator does, like with Brian Peck when they hired him for Disney. So this is like what can happen. He can go and get another child and say, "Hey, I was the so and so mirror on this particular show, and I can get your child acting is," and that can happen against any other child. So therefore, y'all should not be enabling these predators. Therefore, Nickelodeon, you need to take a stand and apologize, Nickelodeon.
recruit this
Allegedly.
type of thing. Like, I feel like that should be a crime in itself. Like, these are kids, Dan. Do not go asking them for pictures of their feet. Like, ew, God, they don't even know better. I'm sure there are some kids who have grown up since that point and they've watched these videos and they're like, oh gosh, I can't believe I was a part of that. Sam and Cat did not last long. It was only there for one season, but Dan Schneider was quickly back to work with a new show called Henry Danger. This show has been on for 5 seasons, and its last episode was last March 2020. This show definitely had its moments, but it wasn't all too bad. But one post I want to share is from Dan Schneider on Facebook, and it's a little like infographic where they ask their fans, would you rather give Charlotte's uncle Roscoe a long foot massage, which, what? Or hand wash and comb Gooch's mustache, which both of those options sound horrible. First off, the foot option, like who wants to go and rub
Like the
anyone's
name
uncle's
in
foot? Like to
itself.
me, he's trying to normalize that action. And it's like, no.
Who came up with the nickname Mr. Gooch? Just like Penelope Tate, Dan. Allegedly, because he's blaming Nickelodeon. Allegedly.
Kid should think that that is normal at all. And he's referring to Mr. Gooch, who is a really gross character, and obviously they are referring to male body parts when they talk about Mr. Gooch, and he runs a place called Junk and Stuff, which they're joking about, you know, stuff, and it's really, like, it's so clear that it's gross, and I don't know why they would want to include it. It's like, not really that funny. Like, oh, Mr. Gooch, like, what? And they falsely claimed that this was TV's #1 kids comedy show. That is not true at all. If you look back at the numbers during that time, they were far from #1. But they wanted to make themselves seem that way. And then there's one more tweet that they shared where they wrote, would you rather give Jasper a foot massage or eat a bowl of hair soup? Which
I would be like, hell no. If I seen my child doing that, giving somebody a freaking foot massage, I would be like, like where was Ella Anderson's parents when this was going on? Where was her parents? And where were the parents? That's why I'm going to start doing an unpopular opinion about the parents who were pimping their kids to Nickelodeon and Disney. Because this don't make no sense. Anything like that, that's crazy. That is so crazy.
which again, neither and neither. But why are they doing all these like foot massages? And you can even see that the girl was doing it in this clip. So I guess it actually went down. And I feel really bad for that little girl because who wants to be over here rubbing some grown man's feet? Like, I would pull my daughter out immediately. She is not here to do that. As I was researching this show, I actually found a really gross clip where they were squeezing a pimple. And if you are really grossed out by this stuff, then please turn away for a second. But the scene was so foul and gross, I just couldn't watch it.
2, 3,
Like, that was so gross. But maybe there's a good reason why they were trying to make themselves seem like the #1 kids comedy. Because Dan's next show, Game Shakers, in 2015, is the worst show that Nickelodeon has ever put out before. That's not even my personal judgment. It's literally ranked the worst show ever produced, like, ever. I was doing some research on this show, and the reviews I found are crazy. This person said pure agony, completely inappropriate. Wow, yeah, there are some bad scenes, just bad. Even my son thinks so, so even the kids don't like it. This show sucks. Every single review is terrible for this TV show, and it makes sense because it's pretty bad. I mean, it's inappropriate, it's gross. I saw some horrible things about it being like you know, against trans people and things like that. I actually found one clip where the little kid was like using his feet to peel an orange, and it was so gross. So that show absolutely sucks, and there's a reason why it was only around for 3 seasons, and after that, it was gone. At this point, Dan's career was starting to wind down, but before they let go of him, in 2017, they actually fired Chris Savino, who created Loud House for Nickelodeon, and the reason why he was fired was because he was doing things to multiple women, bothering them, and obviously that's not allowed. So Nickelodeon was starting to crack down. And then comes 2018, when Dan Schneider was let go by Nickelodeon with $7 million to walk away with, because after
It took Game Shakers for this show to be so horrible for Dan Schneider to actually get fired. Really, Nickelodeon? You owe some people an apology, Nickelodeon. You do. Like, this is sad and pathetic. You owe these kids an apology, Nickelodeon. You was not there. You was not attempted. Oh, there's, like Matthew Underwood said, there's a social worker on set. There's no social worker when it comes to child acting. So parents, if you want to put your children in the industry, do not do it whatsoever. Do not do it because they say, oh, it's a social worker on set. No, it is not a social worker on set. It's not, because when they're doing these scenes and stuff, nobody is there. Like, they'll tell the parents and like to go to the green room, and they'll be in there with the kid doing whatever the producer, they be like, going there and not tell your mother what's going on and stuff like that. Let's finish this reaction video. It's almost over.
After years of accusations and failed investigations, Nickelodeon did not recognize him as a criminal, but as one of their heroes. So they let him walk free. But at the same time, John Kay, who I can't even say his last name, was getting in a ton of trouble. The creator of the Ren and Stimpy show was accused of doing bad things by two girls who were obviously underage, and this man was in big trouble back in 2018 when the news broke. But at the same time, literally the same time, because it was the same week that this man was getting in trouble, Dan Schneider was being let go. You could see the difference in their treatment because Dan was once again handed $7 million and John Kay was sentenced to go to jail. So there's definitely a lack of accountability when it comes to this situation. And I really wish that Nickelodeon would recognize their wrongdoing and actually investigate and hold this man accountable for the years of accusations that have come up. You guys may remember the day after Dan was let go by Nickelodeon, Amanda Bynes actually submitted a little gossip piece to Entity Lawyer, and in this piece she writes, "Dan did it." You may not see what I'm referring to, but on the second line it says, "Thank you for your ongoing support. I don't know how any of these men sleep at night." And as you guys can see, DAN, and then moving on to the following line, DID, and then IT. Dan did it. We've talked about that post in a previous video, but I definitely believe that Amanda is referring to some of the horrible things that he was being accused of, and that's why Nickelodeon let him go. Nowadays, Dan has been really low-key and off of the radar. There are no pictures of him in public. There are no TV shows coming out with him working on them. If you go to his social media, you'll actually see that his Instagram is really active. He posts a lot of happy birthday posts. As you guys can see, he said happy birthday to Frankie Grande, who was on Henry Danger. And oh God, remember the pimple scene? He was being like splatted out. Like, oh God, I would not forgive you, Dan. Dan's Twitter is also still active, but he's not posting on it because people on Twitter are a lot more mean to Dan than people on Instagram. Because if you go look at Dan's most recent tweets, the replies are savage. But I want to read his bio to you guys because it is the same on Twitter and on Instagram. And it says, creates/acts in movies, TV shows, Victorious, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Zoe 101, Big Fat Liar, etc. And then he ends it with invented spaghetti tacos. You might be asking, what is a spaghetti taco? Well, it's actually a recipe online, but if you go look at the Urban Dictionary definition of it, it's actually really gross and disgusting, and it makes me think that Dan is thinking of the other definition when he writes that. But I want to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Is Dan Schneider the creep you thought he was? What do you think about his past? Isn't it crazy how much Hollywood films he has been in and just how involved he is in the industry? Because I feel like this man
Okay, you guys. That video is over, you guys. Make sure y'all like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Lil Reggie out.